I was hospitalized just days before my sister-in-law's wedding, weak and hooked to and for, when my mother-in-law stormed in and hissed, "Show up or you're out of the family." I could barely stand, but I dragged myself there, smiling through pain just to keep the peace. A few days later, she came to my door, tossed a set of papers at me, and said coldly, "You're dead weight, sign these divorce papers." I looked her straight in the eye, calmly told her. Her face went pale, her hands trembled, and she whispered, "That's not true." "Is it?" The fluorescent lights in the hospital room buzzed like angry wasps above my head. My arm ached from the fourth needle embedded in my vein, pumping fluids and antibiotics into my dehydrated, infection-riddled body. Pneumonia, the doctor had said. Severe enough that my oxygen levels kept dipping below safe ranges. I'd been there for 3 days already, and each breath felt like dragging sandpaper through my lungs. My husband Marcus had visited once, staying exactly 17 minutes before mumbling something about needing to help with wedding preparations. His sister Amanda was getting married that weekend, and apparently, the placement of centerpieces took priority over his wife's ability to breathe properly. I should have seen the warning signs years ago, back when we first started dating. Marcus had always deferred to his mother Patricia on every major decision. Where we'd live, what kind of wedding we'd have, even which job offers he should accept. I'd mistaken it for being family-oriented. What a naive fool I'd been. The door to my hospital room slammed open with enough force to rattle the medical equipment. Patricia stood in the doorway, her designer handbag clutched in one manicured hand, her expression twisted into something between disgust and fury. "We need to talk," she announced, not bothering with pleasantries like asking how I was feeling. I tried to sit up straighter, but the effort sent my head spinning. "Patricia, this really isn't a good time. Amanda's wedding is in 2 days." She crossed her arms, her diamond bracelet catching the harsh lighting. "You will be there." My chest tightened, and the heart monitor started beeping faster. "The doctor said I need at least another week of. I don't care what some overpaid quack says." Patricia stepped closer to my bed, lowering her voice to a venomous hiss. "Show up or you're out of the family. Do you understand me? Marcus has already put up with enough embarrassment being married to you." The words hit harder than any physical blow could have. I'd spent 5 years trying to win this woman's approval. 5 years of perfect holiday dinners, thoughtful gifts, biting my tongue when she criticized everything from my career to my cooking to the way I styled my hair. "I can barely walk to the bathroom without assistance," I said, hating how weak my voice sounded. "I'm hooked to and for 24 hours a day." Patricia's lip curled. "Then unhook yourself. Amanda's big day isn't going to be ruined because you decided to get sick at the most inconvenient possible time. People will talk if Marcus shows up without his wife. They'll assume things are troubled between you two." She wasn't wrong about that last part, though the trouble had nothing to do with my hospitalization. Marcus had been distant for months, coming home later and later from work, his phone perpetually tilted away from me when he checked his messages. "I'll see what the doctor says," I managed to whisper. "You'll be there, Kayla. Period." Patricia turned on her heel and walked out, leaving behind a cloud of expensive perfume that made my already struggling lungs burn. I cried after she left, silent tears streaming down my face while my oxygen monitor beeped its disapproval. The nurse who came to check on me took one look at my elevated heart rate and stress vitals, then asked if I needed her to call security. I shook my head. What good would that do? The night before Amanda's wedding, I lay awake in that sterile hospital bed, staring at the ceiling tiles and counting the water stains. My phone sat on the rolling tray beside me, silent. Marcus hadn't called since his brief visit days ago. My mother had texted asking how I was feeling, but I'd lied and told her I was fine, just a minor bug. She lived 3 states away and worried too much as it was. Around 2 in the morning, a different nurse came in for vitals check. Her name was Sharon, and she'd been working the night shift since I'd arrived. She looked at my chart, then at my face, and somehow knew exactly what was running through my mind. "You're thinking about leaving tomorrow, aren't you?" she asked quietly, adjusting the blood pressure cuff around my arm. I didn't answer right away. The machine whirred and squeezed, numbers appearing on the screen. Still elevated, still not good. "My sister-in-law is getting married," I finally whispered. Sharon made a disapproving sound in the back of her throat. "Honey, you can barely make it to the bathroom without getting winded." A wedding is the last place you need to be. I know. But you're going anyway. It wasn't a question. I looked at her then, really looked at her. She had kind eyes, the sort of eyes that had seen too many patients make terrible decisions for the sake of other people. If I don't go, they'll never forgive me. And if you do go? Sharon finished taking my vitals, recording them on her tablet. What happens to you? I had no answer for that. She sat down in the chair beside my bed, which nurses almost never did during their rounds. I've been doing this job for 23 years. You know what I've learned? The people who are worth keeping in your life won't ask you to hurt yourself to make them happy. Her words settled over me like a heavy blanket. Somewhere down the hall, a call button chimed. Sharon stood up, patted my hand gently, and left without another word. But sleep still wouldn't come. I thought about the early days with Marcus, back when I genuinely believed we were building something together. He'd been charming then, attentive in a way that made me feel special. We'd meet for coffee between my business meetings, and he'd listen while I talked about expansion plans and client acquisitions. Or at least, I thought he was listening. Looking back now, I could see the exact moment his attention had started to glaze over whenever I discussed work. It was subtle at first, just a slight distraction, checking his phone more frequently. Then he'd started changing the subject, steering conversations toward his job, his family, anything but my growing success. I'd made myself smaller to accommodate his discomfort. Started downplaying my achievements, hiding contracts worth 6 figures, pretending the company practically ran itself so I could be available whenever he needed me. What a mistake that had been. The first time I'd met Patricia, she'd looked me up and down like I was a stain on her expensive carpet. This was at a family barbecue, about 3 months into my relationship with Marcus. I'd worn a sundress I thought was pretty, but her first words to me were, "Is that from a department store?" I should have walked away right then. Instead, I'd spent the afternoon trying to win her over, complimenting her garden, asking about her recipes, laughing at stories about Marcus's childhood that barely qualified as humorous. She'd remained cold and distant, though she warmed up considerably when Marcus's ex-girlfriend Bethany showed up unexpectedly. Bethany, I later learned, came from old money. Her family owned a chain of car dealerships across the tri-state area. Patricia had loved Bethany, had apparently been devastated when Marcus broke up with her to date me instead. He'd never actually explained why he'd ended things with Bethany. Now I wondered if he'd ended it at all, or if she'd simply gotten tired of his inability to make decisions without consulting his mother first. Against every medical recommendation, I checked myself out of the hospital the morning of Amanda's wedding. The doctor warned me in grave tones that I was risking serious complications. My body needed rest, hydration, and continued antibiotics. Leaving now could set my recovery back by weeks. But I signed the discharge papers anyway because some pathetic part of me still believed that if I just tried hard enough, I could make this family accept me. Marcus picked me up in stony silence, his jaw clenched as he helped me into the car. I'd lost 12 pounds in the hospital, and my dress hung loose on my frame. My skin had a grayish pallor that no amount of makeup could hide. "Thank you for doing this," he muttered as he started the engine. Those were the only words he spoke to me during the entire 40-minute drive to the vineyard where Amanda's ceremony was being held. I spent that drive watching the scenery blur past my window, my head pounding with each bump in the road. The discharge papers I'd signed against medical advice crinkled in my purse. The doctor had made me sign additional liability waivers, his face grave as he explained the risks. Respiratory failure. Sepsis. Organ damage if the infection spread. All of that seemed less frightening than Patricia's threat to remove me from the family. How had I become this person? The woman who'd built a multi-million-dollar property management company from scratch wouldn't have let anyone bully her into leaving a hospital bed. But somewhere along the way, I'd lost her. Buried her under layers of people-pleasing and desperate attempts to belong. My phone buzzed with a text from Jennifer, my assistant at Sterling Property Management. She'd been handling everything during my hospitalization, and she was good at her job, but there were contracts that needed my signature and a potential client worth $300,000 in annual revenue waiting for a call back. I couldn't even think about work right now. Everything hurt too much. The wedding was beautiful, I'll give them that. Late afternoon sun filtered through rows of grapevines, casting everything in golden light. White chairs lined a grass all scattered with rose petals. Amanda looked radiant in a dress that probably cost more than my car. But what I remember most vividly were the stairs. 17 stone steps leading down from the parking area to the ceremony site. Marcus had parked and walked ahead without offering to help me, already absorbed in conversation with his cousin Derek. I stood at the top of those stairs, gripping the railing, calculating whether I had enough strength to make it down without collapsing. A voice behind me said, "Those look treacherous." I turned to find an older woman, probably in her 70s, wearing a lavender dress and sensible shoes. She smiled at me with genuine warmth. "I'm Helen, Amanda's great aunt. You must be Marcus's wife, Kayla." "Yes," I managed. "Nice to meet you." She looked at me more closely, concern flickering across her weathered face. "Are you feeling all right, dear? You look rather pale." Something about her kindness made my eyes sting with unshed tears. "I just got out of the hospital this morning. Pneumonia." Helen's eyebrows shot up. "And you came to a wedding? Good grief, that's dedication." "Patricia thought it was important," I said quietly. Understanding dawned in Helen's expression, followed by something that looked like resigned disappointment. "Of course she did. My niece has always prioritized appearances over actual human welfare." She offered me her arm. "Come on, let's take these steps together. Nice and slow." We descended those stairs one at a time, Helen maintaining a steady stream of pleasant chatter about the vineyard's history, the unusually warm weather, anything to distract from my obvious struggle. By the time we reached the bottom, I was breathing like I'd run a marathon. "You sit right here in the back row," Helen instructed, guiding me to an aisle seat. "That way you can slip out if you need to, and you're close to the restrooms." She stayed with me until the ceremony started, and her kindness was the only bright spot in an otherwise miserable afternoon. When she finally moved to join her family closer to the front, she squeezed my shoulder and whispered, "Don't let them make you feel like you're not enough. You are." I wanted to believe her. The ceremony itself passed in a blur of pain and exhaustion. Amanda and her fiancé Kyle exchanged vows I couldn't focus on. People cried happy tears. I concentrated on breathing steadily, on not passing out in front of 200 guests. When the ceremony ended and everyone began moving toward the reception tent, I stayed seated for an extra moment, gathering strength. Patricia walked past with Amanda, both of them laughing about something. Neither acknowledged my presence. Marcus appeared at my elbow, finally. "We need to do the receiving line." "I can't stand that long," I said. His expression tightened with frustration. "Just do your best." The receiving line was torture. 45 minutes of standing in heels I could barely feel, shaking hands with relatives whose names I'd never remember, accepting congratulations on behalf of Marcus's family like I was actually part of it. Patricia stood at the opposite end, the matriarch presiding over her perfect family event. When an elderly man congratulated her on raising such wonderful children, Patricia beamed and said, "It's all about teaching them proper values and priorities." Her eyes flickered to me as she said it. I smiled through the cocktail hour, even though every breath hurt. I smiled through dinner, picking at salmon I couldn't taste, my appetite completely gone. Patricia didn't acknowledge me once. Marcus spent the reception talking to his cousins, leaving me alone at our table like forgotten luggage. When Amanda tossed her bouquet, several women shoved past me to catch it. I stumbled, barely catching myself on a chair before hitting the ground. Nobody asked if I was okay. The drive home was another silent affair. I fell asleep in the car, my head pressed against the cool window glass, too exhausted to care that Marcus had turned the radio up loud enough to discourage conversation. When we got home, I went straight to bed without changing out of my dress. Marcus didn't follow me to the bedroom. I heard him in the kitchen, the clink of a beer bottle, the sound of a sports game on television. Lying there in the darkness, still in my wedding guest attire, I had a moment of startling clarity. This was my life. This was what I'd chosen. A man who valued his mother's opinion over his wife's health. A family that saw me as an obligation rather than a person. A marriage that had become a performance instead of a partnership. The fever came back with a vengeance around midnight. I stumbled to the bathroom, shaking so hard my teeth chattered. The antibiotics were in my purse, still in the car. I couldn't make it down the stairs to get them. "Marcus," I called out weakly, but the television was too loud. I ended up crawling down the stairs on my hands and knees, my dress tangling around my legs. The indignity of it should have made me cry, but I was too sick and too angry for tears. I found my purse, swallowed the antibiotics dry, and somehow made it back upstairs. Marcus was asleep in the guest room when I passed by. He'd chosen to sleep there rather than risk catching whatever I had. The consideration felt hollow. I spent the next 2 days in bed, running a fever that wouldn't break. Marcus slept in the guest room, claiming he didn't want to catch whatever I had. On the third day, he left for work before dawn without saying goodbye. Around noon, someone knocked on our front door. I dragged myself out of bed, wrapping a blanket around my shoulders against chills that had nothing to do with the thermostat setting. Patricia stood on my doorstep, her expression even colder than it had been at the hospital. "We need to talk," she said, pushing past me into the house without waiting for an invitation. I closed the door, leaning against it for support. "What's this about?" She reached into her massive purse and pulled out a manila folder, tossing it onto the coffee table with casual cruelty. Papers spilled out, legal documents with bold headers. "You're dead weight," Patricia said, her tone as flat and emotionless as if she were reading a grocery list. "Sign these divorce papers." I stared at the documents, my brain struggling to process what I was seeing. Marcus wants a divorce? Marcus wants what's best for him, which doesn't include being tied to a sickly, useless wife who can't even fulfill basic family obligations without creating drama. Patricia sat down on my couch, crossing her legs as if she owned the place. "You've been nothing but a disappointment since the day he married you. No children, no ambition, always making excuses about why you can't attend family functions." The children comment stung more than she could know. We'd been trying for 2 years before I'd finally gotten tested and discovered I had endometriosis. The condition made conception difficult but not impossible. It required treatment, patience, and support from my partner. Marcus had stopped wanting to try after the diagnosis. Said it was too much pressure, too clinical, not romantic anymore. Patricia had made pointed comments about my biological clock at every family gathering since. And the ambition jab was particularly rich coming from a woman who'd never worked a day in her life, living off her husband's real estate investments while taking credit for his business acumen. Something inside me shifted. Maybe it was the fever still burning through my system. Maybe it was the accumulated weight of 5 years of emotional abuse. Maybe I'd simply reached the breaking point where survival instinct kicks in and you finally start fighting back. I walked over to the couch, picked up the divorce papers, and sat down in the chair across from Patricia. My hands didn't shake as I flipped through the pages. "These are very thorough," I observed, my voice eerily calm. "Assets divided, debts allocated. Marcus gets the house, the car, his retirement accounts. I get to walk away with essentially nothing after 5 years of marriage. You should be grateful we're being this generous," Patricia snapped. "You could leave with far less." I flipped through more pages, noting the lawyer's name. Davidson and Associates. Expensive firm, the kind that charged $800 an hour. Someone had spent serious money drafting these papers, and they'd done it quickly. The date on the documents was from 2 days ago, which meant Patricia had started this process before the wedding even happened. She planned this. The hospital ultimatum, forcing me to attend while sick, all of it had been orchestrated to paint me as either difficult or weak. If I hadn't shown up, I'd be the selfish daughter-in-law who couldn't be bothered to attend family events. Since I had shown up but struggled through it, I was the sickly burden who couldn't handle basic social obligations. Either way, she'd won. Or so she thought. I set the papers down and looked her straight in the eye. "Before I sign anything, there's something you should probably know." Patricia's expression flickered with impatience. "What?" "I own the company that manages all of your rental properties." I let the words hang in the air, watching confusion spread across her face. "Sterling Property Management? That's mine. My maiden name is Sterling. I started it 6 years ago, before I ever met Marcus." The color began draining from Patricia's face. "That's not, you work as some low-level administrative assistant?" I smiled, though there was no warmth in it. "That's what I told Marcus because he seemed intimidated by successful women. Turns out I was right to be cautious. But Sterling Property Management handles 43 residential properties in this city, including all 7 of yours." The ones generating your monthly income. I watched the information penetrate her well-maintained facade. Patricia's rental portfolio was her pride and joy, the nest egg her husband Robert had built up over 30 years. She collected roughly $19,000 a month from those properties, money that funded her country club membership, her designer wardrobe, her luxury car. And I controlled every single dollar of it. Patricia's hands gripped the edge of the couch cushion. You're lying. Am I? I pulled out my phone, despite how heavy it felt in my weakened state, and opened my email. Here's this month's rental report for your properties. $5,000 for the duplex on Oakmont, $3,500 for the house on Berkshire, $2,800 for. Stop. Patricia's voice came out strangled. But I didn't stop. I kept scrolling, showing her email after email. Maintenance requests she'd denied. Repair estimates she'd rejected. Tenant complaints she'd ignored. 3 years of documentation, all with her signature or email responses attached. The management contract you signed 3 years ago has a clause in it, I continued, my tone still unnaturally steady. If either party wishes to terminate the agreement, they must provide 90 days' notice. However, there's another clause that you probably didn't read carefully. If the property owner is found to be in violation of housing codes or conducting any form of harassment, the management company can terminate immediately. Patricia's eyes widened. What are you saying? I'm saying that those 7 properties of yours? They're all currently in violation of multiple city housing codes. The duplex has black mold in 3 units that you've refused to remediate despite my company sending you 4 formal notices. The Berkshire house has electrical wiring that hasn't been updated since 1974, a serious fire hazard. The apartment building on 7th Street has a roof leak that's been causing structural damage for 6 months. Her face had gone completely white now. I could see the calculations running behind her eyes, adding up the potential cost of repairs, fines, legal fees. You're the property manager, Patricia hissed. That's your responsibility to fix. Wrong. I leaned forward, ignoring the way the room spun slightly. Property management companies coordinate repairs and report issues. The property owner is responsible for actually paying for and approving those repairs. You've ignored or denied every single maintenance request I've sent you because you didn't want to spend the money. I have documentation of everything. Her face had gone from pale to white. This is blackmail. No, this is information. I picked up the divorce papers again. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to take these papers and leave my house. You're going to tell Marcus that you made a mistake, that you got overly emotional after Amanda's wedding, and that you think he and I should work on our marriage. Like hell I will, or, I continued, speaking over her, I will immediately terminate our management agreement and file reports with the city about every single code violation on your properties. The fines alone will be substantial. The duplex with the black mold? That's a public health hazard. You could be looking at $50,000 in fines, plus the cost of full remediation. The electrical issues? Another $30,000 minimum. The roof? That's structural damage now, which means at least $20,000 for repairs, possibly more if the damage has spread. Patricia opened her mouth, then closed it again. But here's where it gets really interesting, I said. I also happen to know that you've been reporting your rental income incorrectly on your taxes. You've been claiming only 3 properties instead of 7, hiding the income from the other 4 completely. I know this because the management agreement requires you to provide tax documentation, which you conveniently forgot to update after acquiring properties 4 through 7. Her hands were trembling now, fingers clutching at her pearl necklace like a lifeline. That's not true. Is it? Every word. I stood up, using the arm of the chair for support. My body screamed in protest, but I kept my expression neutral. So here's what's really going to happen. You're going to leave. You're never going to speak to me like this again. You're never going to demand that I do anything, ever. And if Marcus really wants a divorce, he can come tell me himself instead of sending his mother to do his dirty work. Patricia shot to her feet, her designer handbag falling to the floor unnoticed. You vindictive little. Careful, I warned. Everything you say to me can be used as evidence of harassment, which gives me grounds to terminate the management agreement immediately. She snatched up her purse, papers scattering across the floor as she grabbed for them with shaking hands. Marcus will hear about this. I certainly hope so. Maybe he'll finally grow a spine and start making his own decisions. I walked to the door and opened it. "Goodbye, Patricia." She rushed past me, practically running to her Mercedes. I watched her peel out of the driveway, tires squealing against pavement. The moment I closed the door, my legs gave out. I sank to the floor, my back against the wall, my whole body shaking from exertion and fever and adrenaline crash. What had I just done? For years, I'd kept my professional life separate from my marriage, carefully maintaining the fiction that I was just a regular working woman with a modest job. I'd done it to protect Marcus's ego, to avoid the inevitable comparisons that would arise if his family knew I was the primary breadwinner by a significant margin. Sterling Property Management had been my baby, born from a combination of business school knowledge and sheer determination. I'd started with 2 properties, buildings my grandfather had left me when he passed. I'd learned property law, tenant rights, maintenance scheduling, financial management. I'd worked 80-hour weeks while Marcus climbed the corporate ladder at his father's friend's insurance company. Within 3 years, I'd expanded to 15 properties. Within 5, I'd hit 40. We employed 12 people now, managed over $8 million in real estate assets, and cleared 7 figures in annual revenue. And I'd hidden all of it behind a fake job title and carefully casual remarks about helping with property stuff when asked what I did for a living. The lies had seemed necessary at the time. Marcus had made comments early in our relationship about wanting to be the provider, about traditional family roles, about how his father had supported his mother while she raised the kids. I'd loved him enough to pretend to be smaller than I was. Now, sitting on my floor in fever-soaked pajamas, I couldn't remember why that had seemed like love instead of self-erasure. My phone buzzed. A text from Marcus. "Mom just called me, freaking out." "What the hell did you say to her?" I stared at the message for a long moment before typing back, "Ask her about her rental properties." 3 dots appeared, then disappeared. Then appeared again. This went on for a full minute before he sent, "Coming home. We need to talk." "Yes, we do," I replied. I used the time before Marcus arrived to pull myself together. Showered, changed into clean clothes, took my temperature. Still running at 101.3, but better than the 103 from earlier. I made tea I couldn't really taste and sat at the kitchen table, Patricia's divorce papers spread out in front of me. The more I read, the angrier I became. These weren't fair divorce terms. They were a punishment, carefully crafted to leave me with almost nothing while Marcus retained everything we'd built together. The house we bought was in his name only, at his mother's insistence. For tax purposes, she'd said. I'd been too trusting to question it. The cars were registered to him. His retirement accounts were protected. Even the joint savings account had been slowly drained over the past 6 months, I now noticed, transferred into accounts I apparently had no access to. They'd been planning this for a while. The question was whether Marcus had been part of the planning or if Patricia had orchestrated everything herself. Marcus arrived home 2 hours later, looking shell-shocked. He found me on the couch, wrapped in blankets, a cup of tea I didn't have the energy to drink cooling on the table beside me. "Is it true?" he asked. "About the properties, the violations, the tax stuff?" "Every word." He sank into the chair across from me, running his hands through his hair. "Why didn't you ever tell me? About your company, about any of it? Would you have believed me?" I asked. "Or would you have told your mother, who would have found some way to use it against me?" He couldn't meet my eyes. "Your mother brought me divorce papers today," I said. "Did you know about that?" "What?" "No, He looked genuinely shocked. "I never said anything about divorce." "Then why has she been treating me like garbage for 5 years? Why did you let her talk to me that way in the hospital when I could barely breathe? Why did you leave me alone at your sister's wedding, knowing I'd checked myself out against medical advice just to be there?" Marcus's face crumpled. "I don't know. I always thought if I kept everyone happy, everything would work out." "You can't keep everyone happy, Marcus. You have to choose. And you've been choosing her over me for our entire marriage." We sat in silence for several minutes, the only sound the ticking of the clock on the mantel. "I don't want a divorce," he finally said. "I'm not sure what I want anymore," I admitted. "But I know that I'm done being treated like I'm worthless. By your mother, by your family, and by you. What do I need to do? His voice cracked. To fix this? I pulled the blanket tighter around my shoulders. For starters, you need to establish boundaries with your mother. Real ones. If she can't treat me with basic respect, then she doesn't get to be part of our lives. She's my mother, and I'm your wife, I interrupted. Or I was supposed to be your partner, anyway. Right now, I feel more like an accessory you bring out when it's socially convenient. Marcus nodded slowly. Okay. You're right. I'll talk to her. No. I shook my head. You're going to do more than talk. You're going to tell her that the way she's been treating me is unacceptable. You're going to make it clear that if she pulls anything like showing up here with divorce papers again, she won't be welcome in our home. And you're going to mean it. He looked like he wanted to argue, but something in my expression must have convinced him otherwise. All right. And we're going to marriage counseling, I added. Non-negotiable. Okay. And you're sleeping in the guest room until I decide I can trust you again. He winced but nodded. Fair enough. I closed my eyes, exhaustion pulling at me like an undertow. I'm going back to bed. This conversation took everything I had left. Marcus helped me to the bedroom, hovering awkwardly in the doorway. For what it's worth, I'm sorry. I didn't realize how bad things had gotten. That's part of the problem, I said. You should have noticed years ago. He left, closing the door quietly behind him. Over the next week, as I slowly recovered my strength, the fallout from my confrontation with Patricia rippled through the family. She'd called Marcus that same night in hysterics, demanding he divorce me immediately and threatening to cut him out of her will if he didn't comply. To his credit, he told her no. Amanda called, screaming about how I'd ruined the afterglow of her perfect wedding with family drama. I told her she could join her mother in never speaking to me again and hung up. Marcus's father Robert called, attempting to mediate. He asked if there was any way we could all move past this unfortunate misunderstanding. I informed him that his wife's behavior wasn't a misunderstanding, it was a pattern of emotional abuse, and that I had recordings of several conversations that proved it. He stopped calling after that. The Sterling property management team began the process of terminating Patricia's contracts. I'd given her the 90 days notice despite my earlier threats, because I run a professional business, and I wasn't actually going to stoop to her level. But I made it clear that once those 90 days were up, she'd need to find new management. The city inspector's report on her properties came back exactly as damning as I'd expected. Patricia was facing over $100,000 in fines and repair costs. She tried calling me directly several times. I never answered. Marcus moved back into our bedroom after 3 weeks of counseling sessions that were often brutal and uncomfortable. Our therapist didn't pull punches, pointing out all the ways he'd failed to support me and prioritize our marriage. To his credit, he listened and started making changes. He called his mother less frequently. He stopped running every decision past her. He began asking what I wanted instead of assuming he knew best. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. 2 months after the wedding incident, Patricia showed up at my office. Not at our home, at my actual place of business. My assistant Jennifer looked uncertain about whether to let her in. It's fine, I told her. Send her through. Patricia walked into my corner office, taking in the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking downtown, the modern furniture, the wall of awards and certifications. Her expression shifted through several emotions before settling on something that might have been respect. I underestimated you, she said without preamble. Yes, you did. She sat down in one of my client chairs without being invited. The city fines nearly bankrupted me. I had to take out a loan to cover the repairs. That's unfortunate, I said, though my tone suggested I didn't find it unfortunate at all. I want to apologize. I leaned back in my chair, studying her. Do you? Or did Marcus tell you that's what you needed to do? Her jaw tightened. Both can be true. I suppose they can. I folded my hands on my desk. But I don't think you're actually sorry for how you treated me. I think you're sorry that there were consequences. Patricia looked away, and for the first time since I'd known her, she seemed uncertain. I thought you were taking advantage of my son. Why? Because I loved him? Because you seemed too eager to fit into our family. Nobody's that agreeable naturally. I thought you were hiding something. I was, I admitted. I was hiding the fact that I'm far more successful than your son, and I knew that would bother all of you. So I played small. I made myself less threatening. And you still treated me like garbage. She flinched at that. I was protecting my family. No, you were controlling them. I stood up, signaling the meeting was over. I don't forgive you, Patricia. Maybe someday I will, but not today. You tried to destroy my marriage because I got sick at an inconvenient time. That's not something I'm going to forget. What about Marcus? She asked. Are you going to keep him away from me? That's his choice to make, not mine. But if you ever speak to me the way you did in that hospital, or if you show up at my home with divorce papers again, I will ensure you never see him again. Are we clear? Patricia stood, smoothing down her designer skirt. Crystal. She walked to the door, then paused. For what it's worth, you're stronger than I gave you credit for. I always was, I said. You just never bothered to look. After she left, I sat at my desk and allowed myself a small smile. It wasn't quite victory, and it certainly wasn't a happy ending. But it was something. Marcus and I stayed together. Our marriage is different now, more honest, with better boundaries. He still occasionally slips into old habits, but he catches himself faster. We see his family less, which turns out to be better for everyone involved. I sold my company 2 years later for a sum that made even Marcus's eyes widen. We moved across the country, putting physical distance between us and his toxic family dynamics. Patricia sends a Christmas card every year now, always addressed to both of us, always signed with a simple regards. It's not love, but it's something resembling respect. And sometimes, when I'm dealing with difficult clients or facing tough business decisions, I think back to that moment in my living room. The moment I stopped playing small. The moment I remembered that I was never the weak one in that scenario. They just needed me to believe I was.